Okay, second attempt, because boy oh boy, Linux has been an interesting experience. Luna here. I know this isn't the run I said would be next. The Fire Emblem 3 Houses with only Gambit's run is happening, and after that we'll get back on track with whichever run is ahead in the last poll. At the time of recording this voiceover, Dragon Age Origins as a solo rogue is in the lead, but recording and editing were disrupted while switching to Linux, and while I was waiting on Bill to get that sorted, I recorded this on my laptop. It's a game that hasn't appeared on the channel before, Kenshi. Kenshi is a squad-based sandbox RPG with base building. First, we need to decide what our win condition is, which is harder in Kenshi than most games, even other sandbox RPGs. You could argue Elder Scrolls games also have this issue because they have so much content without even touching the main quest, but Kenshi doesn't even have a main quest. We pick a start, create our squad, and then survive. Wandering into the wilderness may get us eaten by wild animals, but there are ruins to explore, mineable resources, and trading opportunities. We can build bases that serve several purposes, from providing a safe place to rest and store items to manufacturing gear and trade goods. In short, it's impractical to pick a win condition that fits all challenges. So for Kenshi runs, the win condition will be defined at the start. For this run, our goal is to take out the Bugmaster and Cat-Lon, two of the strongest characters in the game, solo. We may interact with other factions or fight other bosses, but they're the only ones that count. Now for the rules. We must pick a start that only gives us one character. We can only have one character in our faction, the one we start with. This includes animals, so we can't have an army of doggos. At least not this time. If an event gives us a squad mate, we must dismiss them as soon as possible. We can ally with factions and own buildings and other facilities, but we cannot hire mercenaries. We cannot use Assassination on Cat-Lon, the Bugmaster, or any other character with a cross weapon. To win, we must defeat the Bugmaster and Cat-Lon in single combat. No gameplay mods. Graphics and UI mods are allowed. Before we start the run, I just want to take a moment to thank our channel members for helping me keep this thing going. In the You Broke the Tip Jar tier, we have Mob, Forgotten God, and Ginger Knight. In the Tip Jar tier, we have Ace of Kestrels, Ragnarok, Tox, Bwezu, and Burge117. Thank you all for your support. And now on with the run. We're going with the Wanderer start. The others have multiple characters, affect faction relations, or restrict what race or character can be. Races have bonuses and penalties to stats and skills and varying health. There are also less obvious factors like bleed rates, equipment restrictions, and environmental immunities. Non-human races without a human escort will be attacked by the Holy Nation, so they can't enter Holy Nation lands safely in solo runs. Free hivers can't trade with hive settlements because other hive-bound hivers will flee in terror. Gender is a factor too. While there's no statistical difference, a female character can't ally with the Holy Nation. She can trade and pass through their territory safely if she's human. Usually. Male characters have a harder time gaining the trust of the Flotsam Ninjas. Let's go through each option. I'll ignore bonuses and penalties to skills we aren't likely to use, like farming. Hivers can't interact with the Holy Nation or the Western Hive and face discrimination in the United Cities. They have immunity to acid, low hunger rates, and extremely low bleed rates. They also move a bit faster than average but cannot wear shoes. Hiver Princes get bonuses to athletics, dexterity, field medic, and toughness, but take a penalty to strength. They can only wear certain shirts and hats and have 80 health. Hiver soldiers get bonuses to melee attack and toughness, but have penalties to field medicine and robotics, making healing less efficient. They have more health than other hivers, but only their head has 200. Other parts have 100. They only wear hiver shirts and can't wear hats, making it impossible to negate certain environmental conditions. Hiver workers get bonuses to athletics, dexterity, and toughness, but take a penalty to strength. Most of their limbs have 75 health. Their head fares better with 125, but that won't help if their other parts are destroyed. They can only wear certain shirts and hats. Humans can trade with almost anyone. They're slower than hivers but faster than sheks and skeletons, and have 100 health for all limbs, so they aren't durable but won't shatter from a stiff breeze. They can wear almost any gear but lack environmental immunities. Greenlanders have no combat skill bonuses or penalties and a normal healing rate. However, they're the fastest bleeders, and in a solo run, bleeding out is a real danger. Scorchlanders have a slightly lower bleed rate and slightly higher healing rate. They have bonuses to athletics, dexterity, and dodging, but a penalty to strength. Shek have bonuses to attack, strength, and toughness, but penalties to athletics, dexterity, dodging, and robotics. All their parts have 125 health, giving them the best average health of the organics, and they have a slightly slower bleeding rate. Sadly, they also have the slowest healing rate and are tied with skeletons for the slowest speed. They have no environmental immunities and can wear all normal gear. Skeletons are attacked on site in the Holy Nation, but can trade elsewhere. They require expensive robotic kits instead of med kits. However, robotic kits fix damage immediately, whereas med kits only allow healing to start. When damaged, they slowly accumulate wear that must be fixed on a repair bed. They barely bleed, their limbs have 200 health, and they don't need food. However, it's difficult for them to safely lose limbs, which makes giving them upgraded robotic limbs harder. They aren't damaged by acid or the space lasers in Venge, and using a peeler or enemies for amputations would be very risky in a solo run. As for why they can't swap their limbs without destroying them, ask the devs. They can't wear shirts, shoes, or hats, which limits armor. They have a bonus to robotics, a penalty to dodging, and the slowest speed. I'm writing off Hivers. Being unable to trade with the Western Hive and the Holy Nation would be limiting. Their low health and equipment restrictions also scare me. Greenlanders are out too because Scorchlanders would be better in almost every way. Scorchlanders also beat out Sheks for this run, at least in my opinion. Shek's bonuses in health are offset by their penalties, slow healing, and slow movement. But the fact Scorchlanders can travel through Holy Nation land until we get robot limbs cinches it. Skeletons were tempting, but there are a few things that put me off. First, we might not be able to get stronger robotic limbs, which is ironic considering we'd be a robot. Skeletons also can't wear armor pieces that a Cyber Scorchlander could wear. Armor counts for a lot in Kenshi, so a Scorchlander with full armor might be tankier despite their smaller health pool. Having landed on Scorchlander, we probably should have played a male character, but we didn't. We don't want to ally with the Holy Nation, we just want to be able to pass through their territory safely during the early game. We start in the hub, a ruined city near the center of the map. It has one functioning bar, which also sells some general goods. Nothing good, mind you, but we can buy food and basic medkits to start us off. Just north of the hub, there's another bar run by the Trade Ninjas. To be honest, I know nothing about them other than they run this bar and they're happy to take questionable goods. For now, we're letting them clean up any bandits that notice us while we're mining the nearby copper. We sell the ore to them for about 180 cats each and purchase sake, although they don't stock much of it. Once we saved up about 5,000 cats, we head to World's End, a tech hunter city near the northern coast. It's on Holy Nation land and pays lip service to the Akronite religion, but they're functionally tech hunters and don't enforce Holy Nation laws. Even a non-human character could have gone here, it just would have been trickier to get here because we had to travel through Holy Nation land to do so. We buy a wooden backpack so we can carry more. It reduces our stats when worn, but considering our combat stats are 1, we'll be annihilated by anything regardless of whether we're wearing the backpack or not. It isn't a very large backpack, but items stack well in it and it reduces the weight of anything in it by 50%, so it's great for carrying large amounts of small items like trade goods. We can take it off and store it in the ethereal space that all RPG characters have if we need our full stats, but we won't benefit from the backpack's weight reduction when carrying it this way, so the weight of anything inside will effectively be doubled. They also have a ton of sake for sale at a good price. Trading prices are somewhat random in each new game, so it was lucky that a city so close to the United Cities, who buy sake at a markup, is selling it at a good price. The nearest United City, Stoat, requires us to cross dangerous land. The Holy Nation and United Cities patrols won't bother us, but sand skimmers or manhunters will if they see us. Thankfully, we can move fast, so it doesn't take long for us to get to Stoat. We sell the sake at a profit, but there aren't many good deals here. We don't want anything too big or heavy, so things like steel bars aren't great. I was hoping rum would be at a good price because the swampers go nuts for the stuff, but no such luck. The other United Cities might sell it at a better price, but I'd rather not go deeper into the desert yet. We do find electronic components at a decent price, so we buy as many as we can afford and set out for World's End. We need to train strength, and the best way to do that is to run around while encumbered, so we unequip our backpack to double the weight we're carrying. It slows us down a lot, but if we need to run, we can put the backpack on our shoulders to reduce the weight again, or ditch it if we really need to. Ideally, we'd have someone to carry, as carrying someone doubles strength XP gain. I often have squad mates carry each other for strength training for this reason, but we don't have squad mates, so we'll have to keep an eye out for volunteers. We can outrun almost anything when we're traveling light, but there's one enemy that can't be outrun without scout legs: beak things, also known as gutters and as pains in our backsides. Thankfully, they're only in a few regions, but I kind of forgot they patrol the bone fields and ran into them on the way to Catan. If they were fully grown, we'd be toast because the larger ones are faster and hit a larger area, but if we play our cards right, these ones are survivable. Gutters have one attack. They slam their beaks down, dealing damage in a small area. However, they have a long wind-up, which is our saving grace. The beak things run ahead to catch us as we run by, but they're locked in place once they start their attack, so if we zigzag or double back, we can avoid it. That being said, Kenshi isn't built for manual dodging. Combat is typically decided by the character's skill, not the player's, so the controls aren't very precise. We also have to avoid the bones, scrap, and other debris as we lead the gutters to Catan, where the guards deal with them. Sadly, it turned out we didn't even need to go to Catan. I had mixed up which city had dust coats for sale, and we ended up having to go to a city much further north. But, you know, it ended up being a fun chase sequence, so it ended up in the video anyway! With our skills, the best weapons wouldn't beat bandits, but armor would give us a chance of surviving long enough to improve, hence why we're looking for dust coats. Armor is complex in Kenshi, so putting on a tin suit may not be the best idea. Blunt and cut resistances tell us what percentage of each damage type an armor negates. Cut resistance efficiency plays a role too, but that confuses me, so we're not getting into it. Assume higher is better. Harpoon resistance tells us how much damage from ranged weapons can be affected by the armor's cut resistance. Further damage bypasses the armor entirely. Coverage tells us how likely the armor is to intercept attacks on a given body part. Many armors have gaps where attacks could bypass them, and their iffy coverage reflects that. Heavier armors slow us down, and the penalties to speed, dexterity, athletics, and dodging may be more trouble than their protection is worth, especially if we use dex-based cut weapons. I'm missing the armored dust coat. I forgot it was from a mod, so we're stuck with a plain dust coat. It doesn't offer much protection, but has full coverage for the stomach, chest, and arms, as well as partial coverage for the legs and head. It also grants a bonus to dodging and melee defense, making us less likely to get hit to begin with, and solid environmental resistances. Next is a leather turtleneck. It offers less protection than chainmail, but has no penalties and good coverage for the upper torso and arms. We're going with an armored hood for the head. The masked helmet offers identical protection, slightly better coverage, and its perception penalty would be preferable to the small melee attack defense penalties from the armored hood, but the armored hood's environmental resistances make us immune to acid and burning when worn with a dust coat. The crab helmet would combine the best of both, with full coverage and better protection and environmental resistances, but getting one requires us to fight or ally with the crab raiders. We're wearing Masterwork Samurai cloth pants we bought in World's End. Their protection isn't nearly as good as Samurai leg plates that have identical coverage, but the leg plates have athletics, dodge, and combat speed penalties. If we had pack animals, we might carry gear for different situations, but as a solo character, inventory space is precious, so we're mostly sticking to one armor set. However, the speed from our wooden sandals is nice to have while traveling, so I'm willing to spare space to carry plated long boots for combat. Plated long boots offer substantial protection, but their coverage is only 40%, which might be why they don't have many penalties. As long as we don't try to sneak in them, the only downside is a small movement speed penalty. I'm hoping layering these light armors will give us decent protection with few penalties and some bonuses, but if we need more protection, we'll look into samurai leg plates and maybe chainmail. I love this armor system. The layering and offensive trade-offs for bulkier armor's defensive benefits provide a lot of room for experimentation despite Kenshi's small equipment pool. In most games I've played, armor is just a number, possibly with a speed or stamina penalty or a class restriction. It doesn't get complicated unless you add magic effects. Coverage tripped me up at first, but it makes perfect sense once you see it in action. The only game I can think of with a similar system is RimWorld. I'll admit cut resistance efficiency is confusing, and if I simplified anything it would be that. I think I get what they were going for. Our armor keeps us from getting cut, but the impact leaves a bruise. It just isn't as intuitive as the other armor stats, especially since the blunt damage it causes ignores the blunt resistance of any additional armor layers. Another big defensive component in Kenshi is our toughness. Toughness reduces damage from attacks, helps us stay on our feet with worse injuries, and makes untreated cuts degrade more slowly, all of which make us more likely to stay up or at least get back up instead of dying. We'll also be staggered less. The only way to improve toughness is to get hit. Toughness XP gain is based on how much damage we take, not how many hits we take. So unlike Elder Scrolls games, getting gnawed on by rats won't help as much as getting hit by a skilled opponent. However, if we want to live to tell about it, our sparring partners must meet a few criteria. First, they deal mostly blunt damage. Blunt damage will get better while we're KO'd, whereas cut damage beyond a paper cut will get worse until we wake up and treat it. Until we massively improve our toughness, our KO point where we enter a recovery coma will be fairly pathetic, which means the sweet spot of damaged enough to be knocked out so enemies leave, but not so damaged we enter a recovery coma will be small. Even the wimpiest character must have a vital part, the head, stomach, or chest, reduced to negative health to be KO'd. But if the health of all vital parts is still above their KO point and their blood is above 0, they'll regain consciousness after a short time. If the health of any vital part is below their KO point, they'll enter a recovery coma instead. Despite what you may think, this state doesn't necessarily equal a game over during solo runs. If we mostly took blunt damage, we'll slowly heal until our vital parts are above 0 and regain consciousness. At that point, we can tend any cuts and set up our bedroll to finish healing. However, if a vital part took too much cut damage, it'll degrade too fast to get above 0 without help. Normally, that help would come from a squad mate, but in our case, we're all we've got. If we ally with a faction, they'll tend our wounds if they're nearby, and there are a scant few factions like the Cannibal Hunters that'll help even if they're neutral. But by and large, the best we can hope for from non-allies is to be left alone. This brings us to our second point. We need to pick opponents that'll leave us be once we're down. Bandits loot us, but they only take food and weapons, so until we get a good weapon that's bearable. It's also possible to kinda cheese the system and chuck your weapon on the floor once you're knocked out so they won't take it. Kenshi isn't perfect, there's some jank here. However, some factions like the Manhunters will enslave us. They don't even have to be what took us out. If they come across us while we're unconscious, we can kiss our freedom goodbye. We could go through the rigmarole of escaping and scraping together gear all over again while avoiding recapture, but we won't. Maybe a future run will start in Rebirth to show that ordeal, but for now, if we're enslaved, we'll treat it as a death and load back for the sake of time. However, while being enslaved could theoretically be salvaged, being eaten is another story, so most animals are the last things we want to train against. There are herbivores like raptors and guars that are safe. Leviathans won't eat us either, but I don't think we'd survive the encounter. And scavengers like gorillas and the sand skimmers will eat corpses, but won't bother unconscious characters. Gutters, bone wolves, and the various spiders, on the other hand, will eat us alive. Some humanoids like fogmen, fishmen, and cannibals will also eat us, but they'll hold us captive for a short while before we're invited to dinner, so we may have an opportunity to escape. Escaping from them doesn't brand us as an escaped slave, and they don't take our gear, so if we're captured by them, we'll try to get away. It can be a good way to train lockpicking, but it's risky, especially with no allies to swoop in if things go wrong. I admit I forgot about this when creating our character, and one point in Skeleton's favor I didn't mention is that they won't be eaten for obvious reasons. We've been training strength and athletics so we can run away from most problems, even while carrying a lot of trade goods. Sometimes if we're carrying too much stuff to run, we can escape into the water. Most enemies stop chasing us if it's deep enough to swim. However, this doesn't work on all enemies, most notably spiders, which can run along the bottom without drowning and attack us no matter how deep the water is because they had to be that level of cursed. We're looking for safe enemies to train toughness against, like this gorilla bandit here. He hits like a truck and will likely put us into a recovery coma, but the flat lagoon is fairly safe and gorilla bandits mostly do blunt damage and won't bother us once we're knocked out. We're lucky that being KO'd in the water doesn't result in drowning, though. We're getting to the point that, even after purchasing high quality or better armor for most of our equipment slots, a dust coat, samurai cloth pants, leather turtleneck, and armored hood, we still have a lot of cash. It's time for us to visit the higher-end armories, namely the Armor King in the River in Wind and the Scrapyard in the Black Desert City. The Armor King mostly sells heavier armor, so if we end up needing the heavier armor we discussed earlier, he'll be a good source for them. But he's missing lighter armors like the dust coat, so we'll have to find them elsewhere if they're even available at higher qualities than what we've already found outside of crafting them ourselves. I've never really gotten into the armor or weapon crafting in Kenshi. Maybe my next run will be a crafted gear only run. We find a massive band of starving bandits on our way from the Armor King to the Black Desert City and fight them. Or more accurately, let them pummel us so we hopefully learn how to dodge or at least take a hit. We dodge well while we have block toggled, which gives us a 20-point bonus to our melee defense and dodging skills at the cost of not being able to attack. You'd think that'd be great because we don't care about hitting them, at least not yet, but that's not the case. As our skills and attributes rise, they become more difficult to increase, which is standard fare in RPGs, but Kenshi doesn't use base skills and attributes for XP calculations. Penalties and bonuses are factored in too, and that modified value is compared to the skills of our opponents where applicable. Fighting opponents that are more skilled than we are grants more XP, and fighting less skilled opponents grants less XP. That means the 20-point bonus from the block stance makes our dodge XP gain much slower because our dodge skill with the bonus is much higher than the melee attack skill of the starving bandits. This can lead to weird situations. For example, if we have high dodge skill and want to raise it further, wearing a metal suit that penalizes our dodge skill into the dirt will help us gain more dodge XP against less skilled enemies. We're pretty weak and we don't have a weapon, so the starving bandits take us out quickly, but considering we're mostly here to grind toughness, that's actually what we want. I'll explain as our character assumes the recovery pretzel knot here. Toughness is an odd duck. The in-game text recommends wearing less armor when training toughness, which makes sense given how the other skills work. Armor reduces the damage we take, which lowers toughness XP, right? Well, maybe. The wiki for Kenshi isn't the best, and claims that damage resisted by armor or by toughness itself is counted when calculating toughness XP, while also having the in-game text about armor reducing toughness XP, so who knows. However, once we've gotten enough toughness to lower our KO point, it's a moot point because the best way to raise toughness by far is to force our character to get up while playing dead. When a character regains consciousness while enemies are nearby, and Kenshi's definition of nearby is generous, they enter a playing dead state and stay down to avoid attention until we give them an order, the enemies move away, a predator starts eating them, or they lose consciousness again due to blood loss or degrading wounds. They can do a few things while playing dead, such as tending their own wounds provided they have a med kit, but most orders will force them to their feet and make them a target for enemies again. This can be dangerous, but gives a massive toughness XP bonus. We gained about 10 toughness by doing this once, and the starving bandits were far enough away that they didn't even see us. Now that we're at the scrapyard, we need to pick out a weapon. There are tons of weapons in Kenshi, and they scale differently based on their damage. Dexterity benefits cut damage, and strength benefits blunt damage. Dexterity also affects attack and block speed, so it would be unwise to ignore it even with a blunt weapon. Weapons also have a strength requirement equal to either 40 times their blunt damage or their weight, whichever is higher. Also, size matters. Weapons are more likely to hit multiple enemies if they have more reach, which is helpful when we're outnumbered, so all the time. A polearm or heavy weapon would probably be best, although a few others have decent range. However, large weapons inflict attack and defense penalties indoors. I think this is meant to represent larger weapons being cumbersome in confined spaces, but these apply even in large indoor areas, such as the Black Desert City scrapyard we're currently in. They also require two hands, which is an issue if either arm is injured, so carrying a one-handed backup weapon isn't a bad idea. Granted, that'll only help if our left arm is hurt. If our right arm is hurt, no weapons are usable because apparently lefties are an alien concept to game devs. We'll handle the backup weapon after we get our main weapon sorted, assuming we bother with it at all. I'm only considering the two best qualities, Edgewalker 3 and Cross, because we need an amazing weapon. The only reason we aren't only looking at Cross is because those require taking out strong characters to obtain, and we need something to do that with. First, Fragment Axes. They have the longest reach and one of the best overall damage outputs, but most of their damage is blunt, so they require insane strength. Edgewalker 3 needs 116, and the Cross one needs 144. We'd need strength increasing robotic arms and near perfect base strength to meet either. Our strength also decreases if our arms, chest, or stomach are wounded, which would be a problem, especially for the Cross variant. Getting a Cross quality fragment axe requires us to take out the leader of the Shek Empire, and I like her, so I'd rather not do that. Not to mention it'd be a difficult fight, which is why we aren't allowed to use the Assassination skill on targets with cross weapons. Despite its name, Assassination allows us to knock targets out. Granted, we'd need very high stealth and Assassination skill to pull it off undetected, but if we did, I think we could loot the Stone Golem's Fragment Axe without fighting or even ticking off the Shek. Between the insane strength requirements and the difficulty of getting the Cross variant, I don't think we'll pick the Fragment Axe. Sadly, the Plank was also eliminated because it has no Cross variant available in the unmodded game. Maybe the devs felt it was too powerful, considering it has similar reach and damage as the Fragment Axe with a far more sane strength requirement because it's more evenly split between cut and blunt damage. Then there's the baby of the heavy weapons, the Falling Sun. It has noticeably less reach than the Fragment Axe, 25 versus 32, but that still puts it on par with a Topper or Long Cleaver. It also has the best overall damage, with the highest cut damage and the fourth highest blunt damage. It has the same indoors penalty as the Fragment Axe, but because it relies less on blunt damage, it requires less strength, 64 for Edgewalker 3 and 80 for Cross. That's still a lot, but far more manageable than the Fragment Axe. In fact, the only downside I can see is that it requires dexterity to take full advantage of its cut damage, and we want dex anyway. In fact, a Falling Sun might let us take a strength arm and a dex arm once we get robotic limbs instead of 2 strength arms, which would make us faster. Sadly, the Cross one is carried by Cat-Lon, so we'll be done with the run at that point unless I decide to burn down the Holy Nation for funsies. Now for polearms, which are both a weapon category and a specific weapon, just to be confusing. I don't want to bog us down talking about all of them, so here's the one I thought was best, the heavy polearm. It has a reach of 26, and the +4 melee attack bonus offsets the -4 indoors attack penalty, but not the defense penalty, which would still be -4 inside. It also gets a 25% damage bonus against animals, which covers everything from bone wolves to iron spiders, which would make them great for base defense against vermin and the like, but it won't help against Cat-Lon, the Bugmaster, or any other humanoids. The 30% armor penetration might be useful depending on how much armor our opponents have, and it doesn't require much strength, 26 for Edgewalker 3 and 32 for Cross. However, the cross-heavy polearm does about 33% less damage than an Edgewalker 3 Falling Sun, 2.34 versus 3.79. So unless the armor penetration helps a lot, I think it'd struggle to keep up. However, its lower strength requirement would allow us to use it with 2 dexterity robotic arms for lightning-fast attacks and blocks. Its cross variant is carried by Screamer the False in the Tower of Abuse. Sounds lovely. Katanas have penalties against armor and robots, so using them when one of our main goals is fighting Cat-Lon, a heavily armored robot, seems like a bad idea. However, a hacker weapon with a 50% bonus against robots like the Paladin's Cross is worth considering. As the favored weapon of the Holy Nation, the cross variant of the Paladin's Cross is obviously carried by the Lord Phoenix, and frankly I consider that a bonus. It has a +2 defense bonus, only a -2 indoors penalty, and 30% armor penetration. The cross variant's overall damage of 3.36 puts it above polearms but behind an Edgewalker 3 Falling Sun, at least against non-robots. In fact, animals and humans, so all organic enemies, take 10% less damage. It requires 52 strength for Edgewalker 3 and 64 for Cross, so like the Falling Sun, we'd want at least 1 strength robotic arm. Its range also barely got it in the door at only 23. We have to leave the scrapyard and visit a couple days later to find it, but we buy an Edgewalker's 3 Falling Sun. The Paladin's Cross would probably be better against Cat-Lon, but we also have to take out the Bugmaster, so I'd rather have a weapon that does a lot of damage to pretty much everything instead of something more specialized. We don't have the strength to use it effectively yet, but that'll be sorted shortly. I also found out the Armor King does have dust coats, so we'll eventually get a Masterwork one if we keep checking his stock. We've already got Masterwork quality plated boots, armored hood, and samurai cloth pants, so we're only looking for a better dust coat and leather turtleneck. Once we have those, we'll start shopping for robotic limbs in the Black Desert City. Of course, we'll have to lose our current limbs to be able to install robotic ones, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, we need to train up our strength, dexterity, and toughness, so we head out to the Cannibal Plains. There are berserkers, shrieking bandits, and gutters out here, so there's a lot of infighting between them all. It's easy to run in and grab one that's unconscious. They'll be our new sparring partner, but we don't want them to be too dangerous yet, so we take their weapon and toss it somewhere. This has worked well for training up martial arts in the past, so I figure with a Falling Sun, we'll have no problems. We don't. In fact, maybe we should have left their weapon on them. We can pass the time while they heal up by running around with a backpack full of iron ore to raise our strength. We're eventually lucky enough to abduct an intact berserker, one of the stronger enemies in the area. Once we have her, we head back to the trading circuit. We may as well do something while we're running around with a bag full of iron to train strength, although we stick to the safer areas around the United Cities and World's End, where we can outrun most threats even weighed down, or at least see them coming from a distance. We're still checking the Armor King for a better dust coat, but we're also in the market for heavier armor because I'm not impressed by our survivability so far. It might be a bit early to judge considering our toughness is around 40 and our attack, defense, and dexterity are all bad, but we may need to figure out how to carry more than one set of equipment. The wooden backpacks we've been using are great for trade goods, food, and medkits because they can carry stacks of small items, but they're not so great for carrying non-stackable large items like weapons and armor, so we ditch one of them and buy a large backpack instead. These have much larger inventory space at the cost of lacking item stacking, but we aren't going to be carrying more than one of any given armor or weapon, so we don't need item stacking, we just need space. We're also picking out our future limbs. Once we get rid of these troublesome natural ones, we'll be able to swap them at will, so we could have different limbs for different situations. However, we can't go too crazy or we'll have to buy a shed to store them in. If we replace our legs, we'll also lose the ability to wear boots, so we have to keep the armor drop in mind. Also, the Holy Nation will attack us on sight if we're wearing robotic limbs, just like if we were a skeleton. I've gotten around this before in a few ways. By only replacing the arms, which are more important as far as combat bonuses are concerned, they can be taken off while on Holy Nation land. The character can't fight, Or at least I don't think they can. Wait. Can martial artists kick or headbutt or something? Because if they can, or if one of the combat animation mods allows it, I'm doing an armless run. Going by my 5 minutes of Googling, it might be possible if the character has enough martial arts skill to use kicks. Anyway, characters certainly can't use weapons without arms, but as long as they have their natural legs, they can move under their own power and carry things, including their own arms. Another method uses designated meat bags to carry around limbless squad mates, but that obviously won't work in a solo run. Of course, if we don't care about trading with the Holy Nation, and we've been trading with the Swampers, Tech Hunters, and United Cities, so we don't, we can simply outrun the tin cans. We're looking at the speedy scout legs for traveling and the KLR legs that have almost triple the health of our natural legs and about double the health of scout legs for combat. For arms, I'm debating between a skeleton left arm and an industrial lifter right arm. For mismatched arms, we want the right arm to be the one with more health so our sword arm can take more punishment, or 2 KLR arms. We want strength and dexterity, so either set could work. The mismatched arms would give us 25% dexterity and 23% strength, versus the 2 KLR arms combined 20% bonus to each stat. However, the KLR arms have more health, 245 versus 195 for the lifter arm, and only 170 for the skeleton arm. After a few more rounds of trading between World's End, the United Cities, and the Black Desert City, we have a set of Masterwork KLR arms, KLR legs, and scout legs. As you can see, we had to trade a lot of grog to get them. I have no idea what skeletons do with grog, but they'll buy it at a good price. Now we need to get rid of our natural limbs. Sadly, there's no safe way to do that. None of the robotic limb vendors can surgically remove them or anything like that. They need to be removed in combat or by environmental damage, like an acid pool or the space lasers in Venge. The acid pools won't work unless the limbs we want to remove are already badly hurt, because they damage our entire body evenly and inflict stun damage that will heal without treatment. The lasers in Venge, however, are perfect for this admittedly screwed up task. They inflict burning, which organics take as cut damage unless they have resistance from gear. As long as we remove our dust coat and armored hood, we'll take plenty of cut damage from them. They also affect our whole body evenly, but since they inflict cut damage, that won't heal unless we tend it, and parts are always tended in a set order: head, chest, stomach, left arm, left leg, right leg. We can tend the burns on our vital parts so we don't die, and then interrupt the healing by giving our character another order, such as moving, so the burns on our arms and legs remain untended and worsen until they're destroyed at minus 100 health. We can even rest in Venge relatively safely by putting our dust coat and armored hood back on so we're immune to the space lasers again. We still need to be mindful of the iron spiders, skeleton thralls, and the occasional gutter though. Unfortunately, we're not fast enough to catch the lasers because we're still strength training, so we jog back and forth in the northwestern corner of Venge where it borders Shem and the Deadlands and hope the lasers hit us. They turn off at night. I assume they're solar powered, so we rest then. By the second day, we wouldn't be able to catch the lasers regardless of our encumbrance thanks to the damage to our legs, so we hobble after the lasers as best we can. Once our arms are disabled, we start hobbling towards the Deadlands. Taking further damage would be unwise as we can't tend our wounds with both arms busted. It might seem odd given what the place is called, but fewer enemies spawn in the Deadlands and we're immune to the acid rain thanks to our gear, so we'll be safer waiting out the final stages of our limb removal there than risking the spiders, gutters, and skeleton thralls in Venge. This is the first time I've attempted this with a solo character, but I know things will get dicey when we start losing limbs. I'm hoping we can survive the blood loss long enough to jam our new limbs into the soon-to-be vacant sockets and tend whatever bleeding is left. Normally I'd have an ally help with that, but we're winging it. Luckily our arms and legs took damage when we fought iron spiders and thralls, so they weren't at the same amount of health like they would be if we'd only taken damage from the lasers, and this staggered their losses. Otherwise they would have fallen off simultaneously and we probably would have passed out from the blood loss and never woken up. The staggered losses gave us time to partially recover from the initial blood loss, and once we replaced one of our arms, we were able to tend to the bleeding ourselves. A hiver might have been able to take losing all their limbs at once since their bleed rates are much slower, and a skeleton would have had next to no trouble at all with the limb loss itself, but would have had a much harder time damaging their limbs to remove them in the first place, since they're immune to the lasers and acid. Their quote-unquote natural limbs either have to be removed with a peeler, which I'm not sure is possible in a solo run, or in combat, which has all the obvious dangers of, combat. We head back into the Deadlands and test our shiny new limbs out on some broken Model 30 skeletons guarding a ruined workshop. They're safe opponents as long as we stay out of their turret's range because they only use low-quality fragment axes. Don't get me wrong, they still hurt, but they mostly deal blunt damage, and if they KO us, they kindly dump us outside their workshop. They're downright hospitable for an enemy. We're still wounded, so we do get KO'd a few times, but hey, more toughness XP for us. When we take them down, we can swipe their repair kits. We'll still use med kits on our squishy vitals, but we need these to repair our new limbs. We don't need more gear, so as long as we can find or buy food, med kits, and repair kits, we're set, although we might do a bit more trading so we can buy heavier armor. During one of our trading runs between World's End and the United Cities, we come across a High Paladin. He's one of the higher ranked members of the Holy Nation's military. There are stronger units, but they're almost exclusively found near important NPCs like the Phoenix, so we aren't likely to stumble across them. At first I figured we'd take the opportunity to duel him until the health on one of our vitals got too close to being KO'd for comfort, and then we'd put on our scout legs, drop the rocks we're carrying for strength training if we had to, and flee. However, he was a very persistent tail, especially once a few Holy Nation underlings showed up, so we led him to the gate guards at World's End. Remember when I said they only pay lip service to the Holy Nation? I meant it. We're not even allied with the tech hunters, and they jump to our aid against the Holy Nation Paladin and his soldiers. We help clean up the mess once we take a moment to tend our wounds, and once they're all subdued, we scoop up the Holy Paladin. The tech hunters don't care, so once we're done trading with them, we head out to the Floodlands and patch the Holy Paladin up. Why? Because now that he's wounded and alone, I think he'll be the perfect sparring partner. He's a bit more skilled in combat than we are. His melee attack and defense are around 60, and ours haven't hit 50 yet, so we'll get extra XP while fighting him even if he's wounded. We'll have to be careful not to let him heal too much or he'll win the duel. And while we could simply run away like I was planning initially, we'll lose our opportunity to farm him. However, we also have to be careful to let him heal enough that we don't accidentally remove him from the census. We do about 80 damage per hit, depending on where we hit him and how much his armor negates, and that might kill him if he gets to his feet while the health of a vital part is at -20 or less, which he can do because his KO point is -61. A few duels in, we remove his left leg. He obviously can't put up a decent fight while he's crawling around on the ground, so we loan him one of our KLR legs. We keep the scout legs because we need to be able to catch him if he tries to run. I wonder if he'd be attacked by his own faction now that he has a robotic limb. Another few fights and he loses his left arm, but thankfully he doesn't need it to use his Paladin's Cross. We put him into a recovery coma not long after that, and we're low on food, so we remove the leg we loaned him, pick him up, and head off to visit the Swampers for the first time in a long while. Thanks to our scout legs, we should be able to outrun the various threats there even while weighed down, and they have the best deals on food. Once we're done there, we stop by the Tech Hunter settlement in Flats Lagoon to trade, and since the region is fairly safe and our sparring partner is healed, we set him down and start sparring again. We foil his attempts to play dead by putting him on our bedroll, which forces him to get up. He usually attempts to flee, but of course he can't hope to outrun our scout legs. After a few more duels, he's beat up again, but we haven't quite gotten any of his vital parts below his KO point of -62. Unfortunately, during our next duel, we do a little too much damage and accidentally put him out of his misery. And I'm not going to load back. While this is not an Iron Man run, I'm trying to avoid save scumming too much, and the benefits of sparring with him were falling off, especially after his injury penalties were accounted for. We now have 45 dexterity, and our heavy weapons melee attack and melee defense skills are all in the low 50s. We can still use what's left of him for strength training, though. We capture another High Paladin and use him as a sparring partner until his limbs fall off. By the time we're through with him, we have 63 attack, 64 defense, 61 heavy weapons, 85 strength, 76 toughness, and 54 dexterity before the bonuses from our robotic limbs and equipment, and a slight attack defense penalty from our armored hood are applied. We can't gain much from sparring with high paladins anymore, even if we wear a backpack to lower our skills. We test our skills against the Holy Sentinels in Rebirth. Holy Sentinels are weaker than paladins, who in turn are weaker than high paladins, but there are a lot of them in most Holy Nation settlements, so we need to be able to hold our own against several at once, plus some paladins and high paladins in their cities. Rebirth is a smaller settlement though, so it only has Holy Sentinels. We tear through them easily and free the slaves they were keeping. One of them, a Hiver soldier named Plant, joins us, but we dismiss him immediately. The others run away. Next we head to Blister Hill. No, I don't know who decided that was a good name for the capital of the Holy Nation. We handle the gate guards easily enough, but there are so many Holy Sentinels, Paladins, Holy Paladins, and Inquisitors inside the city. We have to go in, attack a few, and run like hell several times, slowly whittling down the guards between us and the throne room where the Phoenix waits. The guards will respawn given enough time, but eventually we fight our way into a barracks near the throne room. My plan was to use the beds to heal, but apparently we can't do that because we don't own them. Kenshi is hardly the only game to have this sort of issue, and generally I think it handles item ownership and thievery better than most. For example, if I loot stuff from the Holy Nation, selling it to a Holy Nation vendor without getting caught would be almost impossible, but selling it to another faction would be easy. There are some hiccups, especially with gear and limbs, that sometimes change ownership when equipped, but overall I find it superior to most sandboxes that assign a stolen tag every vendor magically knows and cares about, even if they hate the people we stole it from. However, it would be nice if we could interact with the beds while holding the Alt key to sleep in them, regardless of ownership, with consequences if we're caught, of course, similar to how stealing items requires holding the Alt key to prevent misclicks. We spent a long time in that barracks despite not being able to use the beds. Enemies rarely ventured in once it was cleared out, so we waited around to heal. It took longer than sleeping would have, but it worked. For some reason, clearing out the enemies manning the 2 turrets on the roof would draw more enemies to us. I think they were trying to use the turrets, and using the turrets ourselves would draw even more attention. We used that to clear out most of the nearby enemies over the course of several rounds of waiting to heal, but the Phoenix and his guards weren't so easily lured out. We had to enter the throne room to get their attention, and there were a lot of them. Several Holy Paladins, Inquisitors, a couple Protectors of the Flame, the Phoenix's personal bodyguards, and the Phoenix himself. We're more skilled than the Holy Paladins, and a roughly equal match to the Inquisitors, but the Protectors of the Flame and the Phoenix are stronger than us, and they obviously outnumber us. They also have good gear, although it could certainly be better. The Holy Nation favors unarmored pants, plated long boots, a heavy helm, and holy plate that is quite protective, but only has good coverage for the chest and stomach. Only higher ranks wear decent chain shirts, and even those don't have great coverage for their arms, so their arms and legs are vulnerable, as I'm sure you can tell, and they have noticeable penalties to dexterity and combat speed. Most of their forces don't have quality weapons and have only been hitting for about 10 damage, but the Phoenix has a cross-quality Paladin's Cross that does about 50 to 60 damage. After a few tries, we managed to lure the Phoenix and 1 Holy Paladin away from the rest and led them a short distance out of the city. And yes, we saved. This was the second or maybe third time we'd managed to get the Phoenix to follow us with only 1 or 2 of his guards. Most of the time, too many of the guards would follow and we'd have to flee. And the previous times we dueled the Phoenix, he beat us easily, even without backup. I considered grinding more, but I was out of ideas for who to train against. Maybe an Inquisitor would have gotten us a few more skill points, but we're almost even with them already. We've also been clearing out cannibals, bandits, slavers, and ancient ruins. Even the leader of the cannibals barely put up a fight. If we had the Genesis mod, there'd be a few more things we could do. We could get better cybernetics, including a shield that would massively increase our damage resistances. There'd be more armors to choose from, and there'd be more enemies that might have been a stepping stone of sorts between High Paladins and the Phoenix and his bodyguards. In unmodded Kenshi, however, the only ideas I had were save scumming the duel with the Phoenix, or fighting other groups like the Fishmen or Skeletons in the Tower of Abuse for a very long time. To be fair, Kenshi isn't built with solo runs in mind, and getting a character to 90 plus in stats and combat skills is intentionally difficult. We're expected to have at least a small squad of competent characters to pull off a fight against an NPC as strong as the Phoenix. And I think if we had 2 or maybe 3 characters with our current skills and gear, we'd be able to beat the Phoenix without save scumming, provided we lured him away from his backup like we've done here. We could also try allying with another faction like the Flotsam Ninjas or the Shek to get their help against the Holy Nation, but they wouldn't help us against our actual targets, the Bugmaster and Cat-Lon, so that would only help if we managed to snatch the Phoenix or a Guardian of the Flame while they were still alive to train against. Plus, I'm trying to avoid leaning on allies, so we save scummed the Phoenix duel instead, and even then it was tricky. He hit like a truck while we barely hit him at all. By sheer dumb luck, we got a couple lucky hits on his legs early in the fight, and once we took out the Holy Paladin that came along for the ride, the Phoenix stopped chasing us. He'd still fight back while we were attacking him, but if we disengaged, he'd turn around and start limping back to the city. We used this to attack and disengaged before he could retaliate, for the most part, and eventually took him down. He's now our sparring partner. We take him to a Flotsam Ninja safe house near Rebirth with unowned beds we can use to heal between duels, and we take his crossed quality Paladin's Cross and replace it with a much lower quality one from one of the Holy Sentinels, so he can still fight effectively but won't do nearly as much damage per hit. We also avoid tending his legs. He'll be easier to manage if he's stuck with robotic ones we can remove at will. Being in this safe house seems to have broken the Phoenix's brain. His AI kept flipping between retreating fast and aimless, like he couldn't figure out how to open the door. This also keeps him from attacking us unless we attack him, just like earlier. On one hand, this makes leveling our toughness much slower because we don't get the bonus for getting back up while enemies are around. Apparently, retreating enemies don't count because we never enter the playing dead state, but it also means we have full control over the sparring. We spar with the Phoenix for in-game weeks, which took a couple real-life days. We sparred until the Phoenix had lost his left arm and our robotic limbs had been broken and repaired so many times that they had accumulated a massive amount of wear. Swapping between our 2 sets of legs would sometimes repair their wear. I'm not sure what causes it. It doesn't happen every time we swap legs, so there's more to it than that. But I'd rather not take advantage of things like that too much. Besides, we only have 1 set of arms, so we couldn't repair them by swapping them. By the time we left to rent a repair bed, we had about 90 melee attack and defense and over 80 dexterity and strength. Our toughness was still stuck in the upper 70s because of the Phoenix not triggering the playing dead state, but otherwise we were pretty much the Phoenix's equal in combat. In fact, we'd swapped our dust coat for his holy plate and wore our large backpack when dueling him during the last part of the grind to give him a skill advantage so we'd learn a bit faster. That means our dust coat is now marked as stolen. Not that it really matters because we're not selling it and we have an over 50,000 cat bounty with the Holy Nation anyway, so a stolen coat is the least of our crimes as far as they're concerned. It's just a quirk of Kenshi's ownership system. Before we headed to World's End for repairs, we stopped at the Flotsam Ninjas village in the Hidden Forest region to hand over the Phoenix to face some more karmic justice. We've gotten everything we can out of him, and if we keep carrying him around with us, we'll eventually lose him. Sure, he doesn't have legs, but where we're going, he might get eaten by a skin spider, and we'd lose the opportunity to ally with the Flotsam Ninjas. Not that they'll help all that much, but still better to have allies than not. Once we've handed over the Phoenix and repaired our robotic limbs, we head to a rock, a volcanic region in the southwest corner of the map. I question whether it's volcanic because the lava doesn't hurt when we swim in it. It's not even considered acid water, but it certainly looks like a volcano. There are massive packs of skin spiders roaming the region, and a pack of skin and blood spiders we need to defeat on the first floor of the Bugmaster's tower to reach the Bugmaster on the second floor. Animals are more dangerous than humanoid enemies in some respects because they don't follow the same attack-defense patterns that humanoid enemies do. They can't block or dodge, so they attack more often on average and can chain attacks together if they stagger us, especially if we're outnumbered. Not to mention the spiders will try to eat us. If we aren't below our KO point, we'll scramble back up, but if we're below our KO point, we'll be eaten alive. Granted, our KO point is -70 thanks to our toughness, so we would have to be KO'd repeatedly, but still, it's a threat. We take out several spiders outside the Bugmaster's tower, but we're injured in the process. Unfortunately, there are more spiders inside, so we can't put our bedroll down in the tower. We're forced to place it outside where packs of spiders are patrolling. We rest when we can, but spend most of our time running away from spiders until we're healed enough to take out the spiders in the tower. We take out the ones around the outside first so we can move our bedroll up onto the tower. It isn't as safe as having the bedroll inside, but it's better than being down on the ground. We heal again, undisturbed this time, and take out the spiders inside the first floor of the tower. Now we can move our bedroll indoors. The Bugmaster won't bother us unless we venture up to the second floor, and the roaming spiders don't usually enter the tower, so we're about as safe as we can be. The Bugmaster's skills are better than the Phoenix's, and he has a cross weapon, so I assumed we'd lose at least a couple times and have to break out of the cages on the third floor, but we ended up getting a fluky fight with him. He hit us a couple times in the chest right at the start, and I figured we'd drop, but we somehow blocked his next attacks and got a couple of nasty hits on him and knocked him out. I guess we'll take it. We take the Bugmaster to the Shek and turn him in for the bounty, allying with the Shek in the process. At this point, the Holy Nation is well and truly screwed, with both the Flotsam Ninjas and the Shek raiding their territory. We could keep fighting them, of course, but we have bigger fish to fry. The Bugmaster had a map revealing Cat-Lon's exile in the Ashlands to the southeast, where we'll find the final boss of the run. The Ashlands are dangerous in and of themselves, as there are occasional clouds of toxic gas that will damage us if we stumble into them. There is gear to help resist it, but we move so quickly with our scout legs that as long as we don't loiter in the gas, we should be able to escape it easily enough. There are many eerie and unique areas in Kenshi, but there are also some that are reminiscent of other games, at least to me, and the Ashlands reminds me of the kiln of the first flame from Dark Souls. Too bad we can't parry Cat-Lon to death. We don't have any trouble reaching Cat-Lon's exile, but we have to fight through an army of thralled skeletons there to reach him. Their skills are only in the 40s, so they're basically martial arts movie cannon fodder, but there are so many that we still have to set up our bedroll and rest for a bit before we move on. Thankfully, there isn't anything left to bother us. Like most of the faction leaders, Cat-Lon doesn't patrol and won't seek us out until we enter his throne room. Even so, the first battle against him does not go well. Cat-Lon has the cross-falling sun, and he's pretty damn skilled with it, so he hits like a freight train. We take about 50 to 70 damage from each hit, depending on where the hit lands, and our toughness and armor are negating about 60 to 80 damage on top of that. We can only take 1 or maybe 2 hits to our vital parts before we're KO'd. Thankfully, Cat-Lon doesn't do anything to KO'd characters, he just returns to his throne and leaves us to crawl away and recover. Surprisingly, he doesn't even have a repair kit, so whatever damage we manage to do stays. That's our saving grace. As long as we don't muck up and get ourselves killed, we can keep fighting him over and over until we wear him down. And no, we couldn't have done this without our toughness and gear. We're resisting over half of his damage. At lower toughness and without armor, we'd have taken extra damage. Not just, not resisted. We would have taken more. At low levels of toughness, damage goes up instead of down. So we would have been one-shot super easily. Not to mention we'd be hitting Cat-Lon even less. Not that we're putting on a good show now. We're using the cross-quality Paladin's Cross that we got from the Phoenix for its lower indoors penalty and 50% damage bonus against robots. At first, our higher heavy weapon skill made the Edgewalker 3 Falling Sun damage pretty comparable, but our hacker weapon skill shot up pretty fast and the Paladin's Cross pulled ahead. During the second round, another group of thralls charged in from who knows where, but in some ways it was a blessing in disguise. Characters are less likely to block an attack that isn't directed at them, so we got a couple hits on Cat-Lon because he happened to be nearby when we were attacking a thrall. It wasn't enough to take him out, so we had to retreat and heal again after we took out the thralls. And so the cycle continued a few more times, although no more thralls interrupted us. But with each round, Cat-Lon got a bit more damaged, reducing his strength and dexterity and making it just a bit easier for us to hit him during the next round, until we finally landed a decisive hit and KO'd him. Unlike most humanoid NPCs, Cat-Lon has an item in his inventory that will kill him if it's removed, his CPU. There are two versions of this item in the game's files. The canon one that's in-game says, CPU of Cat-Lon, one of the founding skeletons of the Old Empire. They sought to undo the crimes and errors of skeleton kind and redeem themselves to mankind, though the humans had long forgotten any of it. He eventually became a dictator. As the empire started falling apart, he tried harder to force it back together. The cut description is similar, but somewhat more detailed. Cat-Lon's dream was to rebuild civilization and make up for past mistakes. His empire was vast and focused on study of the lost technologies, but 1,000 years is a long time to live. You slowly accumulate fears and prejudices from your bad experiences. You change, become angry. Before you know it, you're a dictator. Over time, the population requires more and more force to keep them oppressed. Science and archaeology flourished in the empire until an explosion in the grid caused a famine. I'm guessing this is why skeletons either reset themselves from time to time, wiping away their old memories, or isolate themselves in places like this or the Black Desert City. Regardless of all that, we've successfully soloed Cat-Lon and the Bugmaster and won the run. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, then please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps the channel. Channel memberships are also a thing if you want to support the channel further and get a shout out at the start of challenge runs. And I have a Blue Sky linked in the description that you can follow if you want notifications when I release new videos. Like I said during the run, I'm thinking the next Kenshi run will either be crafted gear only or as an armless martial artist. Let me know which one you'd like in the comments. Also, let me know if you have an opinion on using mods in Kenshi runs for additional content, because there are a few I'm considering using. I'm not sure when the next Kenshi run will be done. I worked on this one on my laptop off and on between other runs and while we were reformatting to Linux, and it's been a work in progress for quite a while, but it'll happen eventually. See you all next time.